In 1962, in a small Pennsylvania town called Centralia, a fire was lit to clean up a garbage dump. Somebody wanted the place tidy before the Memorial Day holiday. The flames looked ordinary. The men who set them hosed down what they could see and went home. But the fire did not go out. It found a hole in the ground, slipped through it, and reached the coal mines that ran for miles beneath the town. More than 60 years later, it is still burning. That fire swallowed a 12-year-old boy into the earth on Valentine's Day. It emptied a town of more than 1,000 people, one house at a time. It got Centralia's zip code struck off the map by the United States Postal Service, as if the place had never existed. And it is nowhere close to finished. Experts estimate the coal under Centralia could keep burning for another 250 years. That is longer than the United States has been a country. A single afternoon's fire, set to clean up some trash, may outlive every person listening to this. To understand how a town burns itself off the map, you have to start long before the flames. You have to start with the coal that built it. Centralia, Pennsylvania, 1866. That is the year the town was officially incorporated, but men had been digging here long before that. This is anthracite country, the hard coal region of eastern Pennsylvania, and the ground underneath Centralia held some of the richest coal seams on Earth. The Mine Run Railroad reached the area in 1854. 2 years later, the first mines opened, the Locust Run and the Coal Ridge. Then came the Hazeldell in 1860, and the Centralia mine itself in 1862. Where there was coal, there were men willing to go underground for it, and where there were men, a town rose to hold them. Centralia grew straight up out of the coal trade. Its houses, its churches, its saloons, all of it sat directly on top of the seams that made the money. The coal was the reason the town existed. The coal paid for everything above it. And the coal, patient and buried and waiting, was the exact thing that would one day take the town apart. Nobody in 1866 could have known that. To them, the ground was nothing but a fortune waiting to be dug out. By 1890, Centralia had reached its peak. 2,761 people lived there. For a coal town, it was thriving. There were 7 churches, 5 hotels, 27 saloons, 2 theaters, a bank, a post office, and 14 stores selling everything a family needed. Children were born here, married here, buried here. Families lived in the same houses for 3 and 4 generations, their names carved into the headstones in the town cemeteries, their futures tied to the mines the way their grandfathers had been. It was an ordinary working American town, and there was nothing about it that looked doomed. But under every street, under every one of those churches and stores and homes, the ground was hollow. Decades of mining had left a honeycomb of tunnels running for miles beneath the surface. Some of them still worked, many of them abandoned and forgotten. The people of Centralia walked over that emptiness every single day without thinking about it. They lived on top of a vast network of tunnels packed with coal that had never been touched. All of it was dry. All of it would burn. All it was waiting for was a way in. That way in came in the spring of 1962. Just outside the borough line, next to the Oddfellows Cemetery, There was an old strip mine pit that the town had been using as a garbage dump. It was not the first dump the town had ever used, but it was the one they had now, and it was full, and it was ugly, and Memorial Day was coming. The Borough Council decided to clean it up. They hired a handful of volunteer firemen to burn off the trash, the same way it had been done in years past. On the 27th of May, 1962, the men set the dump on fire. That evening, they turned hoses on the flames and put out everything they could see. They believed the job was done. What they did not know, what almost nobody knew, was that the floor of that pit was not solid. In one wall, there was an opening, roughly 15 feet across, that led straight down into the abandoned mine tunnels below. The garbage had hidden it. The fire found it anyway. While the men drove home believing they had won, the fire was already going underground, reaching for the coal. Days later, the fire was still burning. Not the trash, that was long gone, but something deeper, something they could not reach. Heat was coming up out of the ground. Over the months and years that followed, engineers and work crews tried everything they could think of. They dug pits to cut the fire off. They drilled boreholes and flushed the tunnels with water and wet sand. They excavated long trenches meant to starve the flames of fuel. Every attempt failed. The state and the federal government would eventually pour millions of dollars into the fight, decade after decade, and the fire would defeat every dollar of it. Each new plan bought a little time and changed nothing. In those earliest days, some engineers believed the fire could still be dug out if the money came fast enough and the crews moved quickly enough. But the estimates kept climbing, the funding kept stalling, and every month of delay let the fire crawl further along the seams and drove the cost of stopping it higher. What might have been solved in the first year for a modest sum became, within a decade, a project too big to fund, and within 2 decades, a thing that no amount of money could undo. The fire did not sit still and wait to be put out. It crawled along the coal seams in every direction, following the anthracite wherever it led, and the anthracite led everywhere. There was enough coal down there to feed it for centuries. Carbon monoxide, invisible and odorless, began seeping up through the ground and into people's basements. The fire had no shape you could point to, and no front line you could hold. It was simply there, underneath, moving at its own pace, indifferent to every machine the surface world sent against it. And it was winning. To understand why nobody could put it out, you have to understand what kind of fire it was. A fire in a garbage dump is a nuisance. You spray it with water, you smother it, you wait, and it dies. A fire in a seam of hard coal, running through miles of sealed tunnels under a town, is something else entirely. No one on Earth has a reliable way to stop one. The coal supplies endless fuel. The old mine works supply endless air, feeding oxygen to the flames through cracks and shafts and passages no one has ever fully mapped. To dig the fire out, you would have to excavate an entire burning mountain of rock, moving faster than the fire spreads, and the fire never stops spreading. So the danger in Centralia was never really the flames. You could not see them. You would never see them. The danger was the ground itself. Ground that could grow hot enough to kill the roots of a tree. Ground that could fill a basement with a poison you could not smell and could not survive. Ground that could, without any warning at all, simply open up and swallow you whole. For a long time, people learned to live with it. They had no choice. This was home, and homes are not easy to leave. In the winter, steam rose out of the hillsides and drifted across the backyards. Snow would not stick to certain patches of ground, melting the instant it landed. Gardens died from the roots up. Trees went brown in the middle of summer. The state drilled monitoring wells into people's yards to measure the gases coming up from below. Some residents kept detectors in their basements, the way other families kept smoke alarms. Parents learned which patches of ground to keep their children away from. People grew so used to the steam and the faint smell of sulfur in the air that visitors would notice it long before the residents did. And still, most of them stayed. And most of them told themselves the same thing, that the fire would burn itself out eventually, that it would move away from the town, that it was not as bad as the outsiders made it sound. The warning signs were everywhere. They were in the dead grass and the warm snow and the numbers on the gas meters. Much of the town chose not to read them. It is easy to judge that now. It is much harder when the alternative is walking away from everything you have ever owned. Then came Valentine's Day, 1981. A 12-year-old boy named Todd Dombowski was crossing his grandmother's backyard when the ground opened underneath him. There had been no hole there a moment before. Now there was one, about 4 feet wide, and it dropped straight down into the dark for roughly 150 feet. Todd went in. On the way down, he caught hold of a tree root sticking out of the side of the pit, and he held on, dangling in the hot dark, while steam poured up around him, and the smell of it filled his throat. His cousin, 14-year-old Eric Wolfgang, was nearby and heard him shout. Eric got to the edge, reached down, grabbed his cousin by the arm, and hauled him up out of the ground, both of them covered in warm mud. What no one realized in that moment was how close it had truly been. The steam rising out of that hole was later measured carrying a lethal concentration of carbon monoxide. If Todd had stayed down there a few minutes longer, the gas would have killed him before anyone could pull him free. The hole had been completely invisible until the exact second his weight found it. A boy had very nearly been swallowed alive by his own backyard. After that, the whole country started paying attention. The Dombowski sinkhole was not the first sign that the fire had reached the center of town. A couple of years earlier, a man named John Coddington, who ran a gas station in Centralia and also served as the town's mayor, went to check the fuel in his underground storage tanks. He lowered a measuring stick down into a tank, and when he pulled it back up, the reading stopped him cold. The fuel was sitting at around 172 degrees. Gasoline, heated from below, in tanks buried directly under his business. The fire was no longer out at the edge of town by the cemetery. It was underneath Main Street. It was underneath the stores and the homes and the people, and it was heating the very fuel that families pumped into their cars every day. A gas station sitting on top of a coal fire is not a business anymore. It is a bomb with a schedule nobody could read. Coddington shut the station down. The fire kept moving. Washington, 1983. By now, the story of Centralia had traveled far beyond Pennsylvania. There had been federal studies, careful measurements of the gases and the ground temperatures, photographs of steam rising from an American town like smoke off a slow volcano. The Dombowski boy and his backyard hole had put a human face on all of it, and so Congress acted. Lawmakers appropriated more than $42 million, money meant to buy the homes of Centralia's residents and move them somewhere safe. It was, in plain terms, a decision that the town could not be saved, not the buildings, not the streets, not the church bells or the corner stores. The government had looked hard at Centralia, done the math on a fire that could burn for centuries, and concluded that the only thing left worth rescuing was the people. Everything else would be surrendered to the coal. When the buyout offers went out, nearly everyone took them. After 2 decades of insisting the fire would leave, the town had finally admitted that it would not, and that the only ones who would be leaving were the living. A town's disappearance does not happen the way you might imagine. It is not sudden. There is no single day the place dies. It happens house by house, over years, so slowly that from the inside it can be hard to watch. In 1980, more than 1,000 people still lived in Centralia. Then the buyouts came, and the number began to fall. A family would sell, pack up, and drive away, and a demolition crew would arrive and pull their house down to a bare rectangle of dirt. Then the next family, then the next. In Centralia, many of the homes were row houses that shared walls with their neighbors. So when one half of a double was torn down and the other was not, a single wall would be left standing in the open air, painted on the inside, exposed to the weather, a cross-section of somebody's living room facing the empty street. Block by block, the town thinned out. Streets that had once been full of homes became grids of empty lots with sidewalks running past nothing. Fire hydrants stood on corners with no houses left to protect. Stop signs guarded intersections that no one drove through anymore. The town was being unbuilt, one address at a time. Still, not everyone would go. A stubborn handful of residents refused every offer and stayed exactly where they were. And eventually, the state grew tired of asking. In 1992, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain and claimed every remaining property in Centralia. The whole borough was formally condemned. The houses that were left no longer belonged to the families living in them. They belonged to the state, which had declared them unfit to live in. 10 years after that, in 2002, the Postal Service delivered the final insult. It revoked Centralia's zip code, 17927, and retired it for good. A town without a zip code is a town the mail no longer recognizes, a town you cannot send a letter to, a town that has been quietly erased from the country's own records. On paper, in the eyes of the government and the post office both, Centralia had ceased to exist. And yet, out in the actual streets, a few people were still living there, still turning on their lights at night, still refusing to accept that their home was gone. The people who stayed did something that is hard to explain to anyone who has never loved a place that badly. They kept the town alive by themselves. They mowed the lawns of neighbors who had been gone for years. They strung Christmas lights across blocks where no one else remained to see them. They planted flowers, swept sidewalks, and fought every eviction notice the state sent, hiring lawyers, filing appeals, digging in. Among the holdouts was the borough council president himself, a man still running the government of a town that officially no longer existed, presiding over a council with almost no one left to govern. To the state, Centralia was a hazard zone, a poisoned patch of ground sitting on a fire that would not die. To the people who would not leave, it was simply home, the only home they had ever known, and they intended to die in it rather than be carried out of it. There is something almost unbearable in that picture. A near-empty town, its houses gone, its ground on fire, and inside the few homes that remain, people still living their lives as if the whole world had not already declared their town dead. The town clung to them. They clung right back. In the end, they won the right to stay. The last residents took the state to court, arguing that the danger had shifted away from their homes and that there was no longer any reason to force them out. On the 29th of October 2013, they reached a settlement. The 7 people still living in Centralia would be allowed to remain in their homes for the rest of their lives. In exchange, they would receive $218,000 for the value of their properties, and another $131,500 to settle the rest of their claims. And there was one more condition. When the last of them died, their houses would pass to the state, and Centralia would finally, fully, belong to no one. It was a strange kind of victory. They had won the right to live out their days in a town that had been sentenced to vanish along with them. Centralia now had an expiration date, and that date was measured not in years, but in the lifespans of the few old people who still called it home. Not everything in Centralia was surrendered to the fire. On a hill above the emptying streets stands the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Ukrainian Catholic Church, built in 1911. When the fire was at its worst and the town was being condemned all around it, there was real fear that the church too would have to go. But in 1986, the Archbishop, a man named Stephen Sulik, ordered a survey of the ground beneath the building. The survey came back with an answer that felt almost like a blessing. The church was not sitting on coal. It was standing on solid rock, a shelf of stone the fire could not cross. And so it stayed. To this day, that church still stands on its hill, and it still holds services, drawing people back to a town that is otherwise mostly gone. It is the one large building the fire was never able to reach. A single lit window on a hillside above a place the maps have given up on. From up there, you can look down on the grid of empty streets and see exactly how much has been lost. There was another landmark, and its fate went the other way, a stretch of old Route 61. The road that once carried traffic through the edge of town was cracked and buckled so badly by the heat and the shifting ground beneath it that the state gave up on the road entirely. They built a bypass around it and abandoned the original pavement to the fire. For years, that broken stretch of highway became a destination all its own. Visitors came from all over and covered it end to end in spray paint, layer over layer, until people started calling it the Graffiti Highway. It was strange and colorful and a little bit lawless, and it became the single most photographed piece of the whole disaster. Then, in April of 2020, the company that owned the land decided the road had become too much of a liability, and they buried it. A convoy of around 400 dump trucks arrived and laid down somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 tons of dirt over the course of 3 days, covering the painted road completely. By that summer, grass was already growing on top of it. Even the monument to Centralia's ruin was itself erased. And under all of it, the fire is still burning. It never stopped. It has spread across hundreds of acres of the coal field beneath and around the town, and it is still eating its way along the seams, 1 degree of heat at a time, exactly as it has since 1962. Signs still stand at the approaches to town, warning anyone who comes that the ground is unstable and the air can carry deadly gas, that walking or driving here could cost a person their life. They are some of the only signs left standing at all. The people who study the fire do not really talk about putting it out anymore. They talk about how long it will last, and their estimate is that the coal down there could keep the fire going for another 250 years. Think for a moment about what that means. The coal is the reason Centralia was ever built. Men came here for it, dug their whole lives into it, raised a town of nearly 3,000 people on the money it made. And now that same coal, the town's entire reason for existing, is the thing slowly burning the town away. Centralia was built on coal, and the coal is taking it back. There is no machine that can stop it. There is no amount of money that can buy it off. There is only the fire, patient as ever, and the time it has left to burn, which is more time than anyone alive will ever see. So count what the fire has taken. At its peak, Centralia was home to 2,761 people. Within living memory, it still held more than 1,000. Today, the residents can be counted on one hand. Everyone else scattered, pushed out across Pennsylvania and beyond, carrying with them the memory of a hometown that no longer appears on any map, a place they can describe but can never quite return to because there is less and less of it every year. The streets they grew up on are lots of grass and gravel now. The houses are gone, the stores are gone, the saloons and the theaters and most of the churches are gone. Reunions are held in other towns now. Old photographs get passed around showing streets full of houses that no longer stand, corner stores bulldozed decades ago, a main street that exists now only in memory. What remains, strangely, are the dead. The cemeteries of Centralia are still there, still tended, still visited, including the Oddfellows Cemetery beside the very pit where the fire began all those years ago. In Centralia today, the dead outnumber the living by hundreds to one. The town has become a graveyard with a fire underneath it. Which brings us back to the boy. Todd Domboski climbed out of that hole on Valentine's Day, 1981, covered in warm mud, alive by the length of a tree root and a few short minutes. He grew up. He left Centralia the way almost everyone else eventually did. And in 2022, decades later and many miles away, in Altoona, Pennsylvania, Todd Domboski died. The boy the fire nearly swallowed is gone now. But the hole is not. The fire that opened up beneath his feet that day is still down there, still burning, and by every estimate we have, it will go on burning long after the last person who ever called Centralia home has followed him into the ground. A fire that was lit for a single holiday afternoon to clean up some garbage before Memorial Day has already outlasted the town it destroyed. It has outlasted the people who fled it. It will outlast the people who refuse to leave. And someday, when there is no one left who remembers there was ever a town called Centralia at all, when the name has slipped off the last of the maps and out of the last of the memories, the fire will still be there, underground, patient, burning, waiting for a town that is never coming back.